For those of you that think that racism isn't still alive and well, especially in small towns across the country, the image that you see in front of you is a picture of Tom Coleman out of Tilia, Texas. Mr. Coleman was a Texas undercover drug enforcement agent. A little history here. In July of 1999, 10% of the African American population in Tula, Texas, which is a small town up around Amarillo, with a population of about 5,000, 10% of the people were arrested on drug charges solely on the testimony of Mr. Coleman. He arrested 46 people, 39 of them black, and got 38 convictions for various drug charges with sentences up to 90 years in prison. In April of 2003, a Dallas judge threw out all 38 drug convictions from Tilia because they were based on questionable testimony from a single undercover agent, Mr. Coleman, who was accused of racial prejudice. On June 16th of that year, 12 of the defendants remaining in the case, most of the others had accepted plea bargains in order to avoid lengthy prison sentences, were freed by Texas Governor Perry through the signing of a bill authorizing their release. They couldn't just let these people out of jail because this was a lying sack of shit. Okay, Mr. Coleman was a Texas cop, and he had a very checkered past, and he also was a self-declared racist. At the time that Mr. Coleman was making the arrest, he worked for the Panhandle Regional Narcotics Task Force, one of about 1,000 drug task force operating across America with very little oversight and no accountability. The problem here is the Texas task force was the beneficiary of Mr. Coleman's lies. The more arrests he made and the more convictions he got, the more federal grant money the task force received. Just another simple outcome of the war on drugs. Arrest people, convict people, and get paid. Perversely, in this Bucks for Drugs world, Coleman was named Texas Outstanding Narcotics Officer in 2000. This is surprising since Mr. Coleman had kept no written records, not a single photograph, no video, no audio, no nothing, nobody observing his buys. It was just his word against the word of the people that he arrested. Every conviction relied solely on his word. The Texas judge who freed the defendants in June called Coleman the most devious, non-responsive law enforcement witness that court had witnessed in 25 years. According to the court's findings, Mr. Coleman submitted false reports, misrepresented his investigative work, and misidentified various defendants during his investigation. Subsequent to that April ruling, Coleman was indicted on 3 counts of perjury in an unrelated case, and although he faces up to 10 years in prison, his misdeeds in the Tilia case have yet to be formally recognized. Furthermore, the Tilia 12, which have not been completely exonerated, I wonder why, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals must approve the ruling for their convictions, and those of the 26 others ensnared in the bogus drug sting to be thrown out. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles should also do its part by pardoning the defendants or granting clemency or commutation in the cases. The ACLU had urged the state lawmakers to vote for the bill, vote for a bill that requires corroboration of undercover law enforcement officers' testimony before a defendant is convicted. However, racially motivated arrests and violations of civil liberties like the Tilia case continue to run amok in our system. Now, as a follow-up, Mr. Coleman was convicted of perjury later on in that year. And it's like really ridiculous, all the things that are going on here in this country, and people are basically just turning a blind eye. Anyway, just thought that you should know that. Now, his boss, and I apologize for not having his name, but his boss knew full well how dirty of a cop this guy was. They had done an investigation of Mr. Coleman, and the investigator came back and told him that Mr. Coleman had been arrested for stealing money from the previous community that he worked in, and that there was an indictment. Now, why a bench warrant wasn't issued for his arrest is still beyond me, but his boss had gotten up in front of the grand jury, issued testimony that he didn't know anything about Mr. Coleman's history, and his own previous testimony in a prior case indicated that he did know about some of the issues with Mr. Coleman. Now, the prosecutor declined to prosecute his boss, and in a subsequent election, his boss was elected by a landslide. His boss continued to work until, I believe it was 2010, when he retired. So, again, small town sheriffs, small town undercover drug agents busting people. There really isn't any oversight or control over these guys, so that when somebody turns around and tells you that they were set up and that they didn't do what these drug enforcement guys are claiming they did, here's a prime example of somebody who basically just arrested people, no evidence, no nothing, and got those people convicted just on his word.